Then fire her, or we walk." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Madeleine's tray shaking in her hands. And Clara, she stood without a word and pushed her untouched plate off the table. Porcelain shattered across polished marble. Nobody moved, not the guests, not the waitstaff, not Sebastian Churchill, the man who owned the house and everyone in it. But this story didn't start with broken plates. It started with silence. And the kind of quiet a person learns to live inside when the world decides they don't matter. Madeleine James never belonged in a place like this. The Marland mansion loomed over Ponca City like it owned the sky. Tall columns, sprawling lawns, and a dining room lined with gold leaf frames and oil paintings of dead men in velvet coats. It wasn't just a house, it was a monument to money. And somewhere between the stone steps and the gilded ceilings, Madeleine existed. Not as a guest, not even as an employee anyone learned by name, but as the maid, the one who cleared the plates, polished the forks, kept her head down and her voice soft enough to forget. But Madeleine was more than what they saw. She had stories in her hands, calluses from years of caretaking, from braiding her little sister's hair with hands that trembled from exhaustion. She had memories in her cooking, recipes passed down from grandmothers who used spice like resistance and flavor like love. She didn't ask for attention, just enough space to breathe, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to be more than the background. Across the estate, Clara Churchill was everything Madeleine wasn't. White, wealthy, educated in private boarding schools with French tutors and fencing lessons, daughter of billionaire Sebastian Churchill, oil magnate, media darling, political kingmaker. But Clara wasn't made of glass and pearls like her father's friends. She didn't care about table manners or monogrammed dinner napkins. She didn't want to be a debutante or a social chess piece. She wanted to be real. And lately, the only person in this house who felt real was the maid. Clara had watched Madeleine from behind banisters and between cocktail dresses. She noticed how people spoke over her, how they left empty wine glasses for her to collect without so much as a glance. She noticed how Madeleine would smile anyway, not because she had to, but because she refused to let the world harden her. Clara admired that, resented it even. Because in a mansion full of everything money could buy, Clara had never seen someone wear dignity like armor the way Madeleine did. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. The Churchills were hosting the biggest event of the year, an exclusive dinner for elite investors, political allies, and long-time business rivals. Deals would be whispered behind wine glasses. Allegiances would be forged over steak and imported champagne. The guest list was tight. The stakes were higher. And when the head chef caught the flu 2 nights before, it was Madeleine who stepped forward. She wasn't a professional, but she was capable. She had helped in the kitchen for years, silently, skillfully, invisibly. Now, she was the one preparing every course. And she had done it beautifully. She didn't need applause, just the respect of being allowed to serve without shame. But people like Madeleine weren't supposed to shine. Not here. Not among the rich. Not when the food came from hands they didn't deem worthy. The laughter started halfway through the first course. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a low chuckle from one end of the table, then a mutter. "Wait." The maid cooked. A man in a navy pinstripe suit leaned back in his chair, fork dangling loosely between his fingers. He didn't whisper. He wanted to be heard. "You're joking, right?" another guest added. "No offense, but I didn't sign up for soul food." The table rippled with amusement. Even Mr. Churchill offered a polite chuckle, trying to wave it off as harmless banter. But Clara wasn't laughing. And Madeleine. She stood at the edge of the room, holding her tray like it might protect her. Her eyes dropped, her shoulders tensed. Her mouth didn't move, but her silence screamed. She had worked for days perfecting that menu, had stayed up after her shift testing recipes on her own dime, had whispered over the stove, "Make it right, Maddie. This is your one shot." But respect doesn't come served on a silver platter, especially when the hands holding it don't match the ones sitting at the table. Sebastian didn't look at her. He looked at the guests, at their cufflinks and Rolexes and voting power, at the way the senator arched his brow and smirked. "Then fire her, or we walk." Let's be real for a second. What would you have done? If you were Clara? If that was your father? If the whole room turned cold toward a woman who'd done nothing but serve with grace? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear it. Because not everyone stays quiet, and not every daughter stays seated. Clara stood, not fast, not dramatic, but with a weight that cracked the room in half. No words, no warning. Just her hand, pushing the plate off the edge of the table. The crash echoed through the marble like thunder. Madeleine didn't look up, but she heard it, and for the first time in her life inside that mansion, someone had stood up for her, and that was just the beginning. Clara didn't sit back down. She stood there, arms at her sides, her plate in pieces on the floor, facing a table full of men who'd never been told no without someone paying for it. The silence wasn't quiet. It buzzed with discomfort, entitlement, and disbelief. Forks hovered in mid-air. No one took a bite. At the far end, Senator Langston finally spoke, voice oily and amused. "Is this some kind of performance, Clara? Because if you're trying to impress us..." "I'm not." Her voice cut clean through the air. She turned to him, calm but sharp. "I just don't dine with bigots." Gasps. Not because they were shocked by the bigotry, but because she said it, out loud, in this room, in front of her father. Sebastian Churchill's face hardened. He didn't speak, not yet, but his eyes flicked to Clara with the kind of look that said, "Not now, not like this." Clara didn't flinch. She looked right at Madeleine. "You cooked this meal?" Madeleine's throat was dry. She nodded once, barely. "Then it's the only plate in this room I respect." Someone laughed sarcastically. A CEO Clara had known since she was 5. "You're young," he said, tilting his glass. "You don't understand how this works. We don't let the help play chef." That word, help, landed like a slap, not just to Madeleine, but to Clara. Because it wasn't about cooking. It never was. It was about the kind of people these men believed mattered, and the ones they didn't. Sebastian finally spoke. His voice was measured, almost too calm. "Clara, enough." But Clara didn't move. "No, Dad, not enough. I've watched her work here for 2 years. I've seen the way you all talk around her, like she's not even human." Madeleine stood frozen, tray still in her hands, trying not to let her face break. Every word felt like a spotlight she hadn't asked for, but for once, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen and terrified, because power never shifts quietly. Senator Langston leaned forward, setting his silverware down with an audible clink. His tone dripped with condescension. "Let me explain something, sweetheart. There are standards, protocols. In my house, this girl wouldn't be allowed in the kitchen, let alone cook for guests of this caliber." And there it was. This girl, not Madeleine, not even maid. Just a label meant to shrink her down to size, to remind her who had the seat at the table and who didn't. Clara's hands trembled now, but not with fear. "Then maybe your house is the problem." Sebastian stood, finally, voice low, firm. "Clara, sit down. Now." But Clara turned to her father slowly. Her eyes were wet, but clear. "No, if her food isn't good enough for them, then neither am I." A chair scraped back, another plate left untouched, and slowly a ripple moved through the room. Not of applause, not of protest, but of discomfort, because no one knew what to do with a girl who refused to stay quiet, or a maid who had suddenly become more than a background blur. Madeleine still hadn't moved. The tray was too heavy now, not from weight but from what it carried. Shame, pride, danger, change. Clara walked over. She didn't speak, just reached for the tray with both hands, gently. Their eyes met for the first time all night, and in that glance, Madeleine saw something she hadn't in years. Allegiance, but also something more dangerous. Witness. Because once someone sees you, You can't go back to being invisible. And once someone fights for you, you have to decide if you're ready to fight for yourself too. Let me ask you something. If someone stood up for you like this, would you believe it? Or would you wait for them to walk away like everyone else did? Drop your honest answer in the comments. We read every single one, because this story, it's only just beginning. Madeline didn't sleep that night. She didn't cry either. Instead, she stood in her tiny room behind the mansion's east wing, staring at the apron folded on her chair like it was evidence in a trial she hadn't asked to be part of. The words were still ringing in her ears. If her food isn't good enough for them, then neither am I. No one had ever said something like that for her. Not at school, not in town, not in church, definitely not in a room full of billionaires and senators who saw her as nothing more than the help. But Clara had, and that terrified Madeline more than the insults ever could. Down the hall, Clara's door clicked shut. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands still trembling, not from shame, from adrenaline, from the kind of anger that left you wide awake and electrified. She had stood up for someone who had done nothing wrong, and yet somehow, it already felt like she had become the villain in her own house. In the morning, Clara came downstairs to silence. The staff didn't speak to her. Her father didn't greet her. Even the usual breakfast chatter was gone. It was quiet. Too quiet. Like the whole mansion had taken a breath it didn't want to exhale. Sebastian Churchill was already in the conservatory, reading the Wall Street Journal like he hadn't just watched his daughter shatter a dinner that took 2 months to plan. Sit. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Clara sat across from him. The morning light filtered through the glass ceiling and danced across his silver cufflinks. Do you have any idea what you did last night? Yes. You embarrassed me. No, Dad. They embarrassed themselves. He set the paper down. This isn't college, this is real life. You don't get to make a scene and expect no consequences. Do you understand how hard I worked to get those men to the table? Maybe that's the problem, Clara said softly. You've worked harder to impress them than to protect the people who actually serve this house. In the kitchen, Madeline scrubbed dishes with her headphones in. She just needed the illusion of sound, something to keep her from replaying it all over again. She had expected to be fired, expected to come in and find a pink slip, or worse, nothing at all. But so far, nothing. No one spoke to her. No one looked her in the eye, not even the other staff. At noon, one of the older butlers passed her in the hallway and muttered under his breath, "You should have known better." She paused. Known what? He didn't stop walking, didn't even glance back. Not to let the daughter drag you into her mess. You don't belong at that table, Madeline. You never will. Outside, Clara stood alone by the garden steps. She saw Madeline through the window, wanted to speak to her, but something stopped her. What if she didn't want to talk? What if Clara had made things worse? Standing up had felt right in the moment. But now the silence felt like a punishment. At dinner that night, the table was set again. Smaller, more subdued. No senators, no CEOs, just the Churchills. Madeline brought out the food quietly. Not the same meal, just simple roast chicken and rice. Sebastian didn't look at her. Clara kept her eyes down, waiting for something, anything. But Madeline served, turned, and left without a word. No eye contact, no nod, no acknowledgement. And that hurt more than Clara expected. In her room, Madeline sat with a piece of paper on her lap, a resignation letter. She hadn't written anything yet, just kept staring at the top line, "To whom it may concern." She didn't know what to say. She just knew she couldn't live in the in-between, not invisible, not a symbol, just a person. And the thing about being seen, once someone does it, it's impossible to pretend it didn't happen. Let me ask you this. Have you ever tried to go back to normal after something cracked open in you, like pretending it didn't change you? Let me know in the comments, because some things you can't unfeel, and some silences are louder than words. The day after the dinner felt like walking through fog. No one spoke about what happened. No one dared. Madeline kept her head down, Clara kept her distance, and Sebastian, He retreated into strategy meetings and conference calls, pretending the world hadn't cracked open in his own dining room. But that fog didn't erase the tension. It only made it thicker. On Thursday morning, the house manager delivered news that would trap them both. "Mr. Churchill has assigned you, Madeline, to assist Miss Clara for the remainder of the week," he said flatly, like reading from a script. Madeline blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Her personal assistant is on leave. He wants you to accompany her into town. Shopping, charity events, whatever's on her calendar." It's not a request, it's from him directly." Clara was just as stunned. She stood by the front door, arms crossed, sunglasses perched like armor. Madeline approached slowly, still in uniform. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but Madeline walked right past her and opened the car door herself. They didn't say a word the entire drive into Ponca City. The first stop was a boutique downtown. Clara handed her a stack of dresses to carry, not out of rudeness, but because that's what she'd always done. Madeline said nothing. Inside, wealthy women floated between racks like swans in pearls. They eyed Madeline once, long enough to make her feel the weight of her skin, her clothes, her place. Clara noticed. She felt it too. "Don't worry," one woman whispered to her friend, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's with her. Her. Like a guard dog, like a burden, like an it." Clara tried to speak later, while Madeline waited by the dressing room. "About the other night." "Don't." Madeline didn't even look at her. Her voice was calm, tired. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Churchill." The words were formal, worse than anger. They were distant. Back at the car, Clara finally snapped, "Why are you acting like I did something wrong?" Madeline didn't turn the key. She just sat there. "Because you think standing up once fixes everything. But you get to go home and be rich and safe. I don't." Clara stared at her. "You think I don't care?" "I think you don't understand." Silence. The kind that makes your chest tight. The kind that swallows good intentions whole. But the mansion wasn't done with them yet. That night, Sebastian's publicist called. One of the guests had leaked a clip from the dinner, just a few seconds. Clara standing, the plate smashing, a glimpse of Madeline in the background. Now Twitter was on fire. Some praised Clara, some mocked her, some called the dinner performative woke theatre, and others, they wanted to know who the Black Maid was. Sebastian was livid. "This is exactly why we keep staff out of view," he hissed into the phone. "This is what happens when lines are crossed." Clara stood in the hallway, hearing every word. Madeline passed by, tray in hand, just in time to catch his final line. "She never should have been in that kitchen in the first place." They didn't speak again until Saturday. Clara had a community outreach event to attend, something her father insisted on for press optics. Madeline was told to accompany her. They sat in the back of the venue afterward, tired, disconnected, surrounded by folding chairs and leftover catering trays. Clara rubbed her temples. Madeline refilled plastic cups of lemonade in silence. Finally, Clara broke. "Do you hate me now?" Madeline didn't flinch. "I don't know what I feel." There it was, raw and real, no armor, no privilege, just honesty. The first moment that wasn't scripted by guilt or pressure, and for a second, just 1 second, it was enough to make both of them breathe again. But only for a second. Because when they returned to Marland Mansion, something was waiting for them in the kitchen. Madeline's locker had been opened, and inside, taped to her apron, was a note. "Charity cases don't belong in the dining room." No name, no handwriting, just venom and intent. Madeline didn't say a word about the note. She folded it, tucked it into her pocket, and kept moving. That's how you survived in houses like this. You moved through it, through the whispers, the looks, the reminders of your place. She'd been doing it her whole life. But that night, something cracked. She didn't cry, she cooked. Not for the guests, not for Churchill. She cooked for herself. A small pot of rice, smothered chicken, collard greens with smoked turkey neck. Not fancy, not expensive, but real. She stood barefoot in the staff kitchen, humming softly as the smell filled the space like memory. Eyes closed, back against the counter. She let it take her somewhere else. It had been 10 years since her mother passed. Her hands had cooked through grief before, through silence, through shame. She remembered her mother's voice like an echo. "You cook with love, baby, even if they never taste it." And she always had, even for people who never saw her as anything more than a uniform. Clara walked in without knocking. She stopped in the doorway, surprised by the smell. It was warm, inviting, not like the rehearsed elegance of the upstairs meals. This was food that meant something. Madeline looked up, didn't speak. Clara did. Finally. "I was 11 when they sent my mother away." Clara walked over, sat down slowly on a stool across from her. She wasn't staff. She was family. At least that's what I thought. A pause. "She got too close to my dad's business, asked the wrong questions. One day I came home and she was just gone." Madeline watched her carefully. No one ever talked about her again, not even at the funeral. Clara's voice broke just slightly. "So, yeah, maybe I stood up the other night to prove a point, but it's more than that. I stood up because I've watched this house swallow too many people whole." Another silence. "And I didn't want you to be one of them." The food between them steamed gently. Madeline handed her a plate. No words, just action. Clara took a bite, closed her eyes, and smiled, really smiled. "This is the best thing I've eaten all week." Madeline let out the softest laugh, not because she was flattered, but because for the first time it felt true. Someone wasn't performing kindness. They were just being kind. Later that night, Madeline pulled the note from her pocket, but instead of throwing it away, she slid it into a drawer. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. That dignity isn't handed to you. It's held on to, even when they try to take it. Let me ask you something real. If someone handed you a way out, would you take it? Or would you stay long enough to finish what they said you weren't allowed to start? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments, because some battles aren't just about escape. They're about ending the silence for good. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm neither of them expected. Clara and Madeline kept crossing paths, not because they had to, but because neither one could quite stay away. They didn't talk about what happened at the dinner, not anymore, not directly, but there was a shift, small gestures, unspoken trust. On Tuesday, Clara wandered into the kitchen while Madeline was prepping tea service. "You always hum when you cook?" Madeline glanced over her shoulder, smirking just a little. "Only when I'm trying not to cuss," Clara laughed, genuinely. A full, unfiltered laugh that echoed off the tiled walls. Madeline raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" "It's been a long time since I've laughed like that." She meant it. Later that afternoon, Clara found an old record player buried in the east parlor, covered in dust, half forgotten. She brought it to the kitchen without asking. "My mom used to play Etta James on this," she said softly. "She used to say you could fix anything with the right song." Madeline didn't respond. She just slid a record from the case and gently dropped the needle. Warm static filled the air. Then a slow, aching voice broke through. "I'd rather go blind." They stood there, two women from opposite worlds bound by grief they never talked about. No titles, no roles, just presence. That night, Clara helped with prep, not because she had to, not because she knew what she was doing, but because it felt right. She rolled dumplings with too much filling, burned her hand on a pot handle, laughed through all of it. Madeline tried to scold her, but gave up halfway through the sentence. "You're not built for the kitchen." "No, but I'm built for trying." Outside, the mansion glowed like something out of a fairy tale. Inside, two women, one born into money, the other born into silence, shared a kitchen like it was a sanctuary, and for a moment, just one moment, it felt like healing was possible, but nothing in this house stays safe for long. At the end of the night, Clara lingered by the kitchen door. "I've been thinking," she said, "about that night, the dinner, what I said." Madeline met her eyes. "I didn't do it to be brave," Clara whispered. "I did it because I couldn't stand to watch them treat you like furniture anymore." A pause. "And I'm sorry if that made your life harder." Madeline nodded slowly. "It did. A beat. But it also reminded me I still have one." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But when Clara walked away, she left something behind. A slice of something real. Something not even this mansion could take away. Madeline was in the pantry when she heard them. The door wasn't fully shut. She hadn't meant to listen. But once she heard her name, it was too late to unhear it. "You don't get it, Dad. You never will." It was Clara's voice, tight, angry, breaking. "This isn't about a dinner. It's about decency. About basic human... It's about business." Sebastian's voice was colder than usual. Not angry, just done. "This family doesn't survive on ideals, Clara. It survives on power, and power comes from knowing which lines not to cross." A pause. "She's a maid, Clara, not a martyr." Madeline didn't breathe. She couldn't. She pressed herself further into the wall like she could disappear, but the words clung to her skin. Not a martyr, just a maid. And then Clara spoke again, but softer this time. "So what now? You fire her because the men at your table didn't like her hands?" Sebastian exhaled sharply. "I'm sending her a severance, quietly, no scandal. You'll be assigned someone new by next week." That was it. No discussion, no defense, just dismissal. Madeline backed away from the door like it had burned her. She couldn't cry, she couldn't scream. She just needed to move. That night she didn't show up for dinner prep. She didn't clock out either. She just disappeared into the garden behind the estate, barefoot, holding the resignation letter she had never finished. The wind tugged at her apron. Tears welled, then spilled. Finally. Because no matter how carefully she moved, no matter how well she cooked, the ending was always the same. They would never let her stay. Clara searched the house for hours. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her stomach. Finally, she found her, sitting alone beneath the big oak tree by the staff exit, shoes off, eyes red. "Madeline." No answer. Clara walked closer. "You heard him, didn't you?" Still nothing. Then, soft, brittle, "I heard everything." A long pause. "I didn't know he was going to—" "You don't have to explain." Madeline stood. "You did what you could. You spoke up. That's more than most people would have done." But her voice was hollow, polite, distant again. Clara's chest tightened. "I didn't stand up to lose you." Madeline forced a smile. "Then maybe you should have kept quiet." Clara stepped back like she'd been slapped. She wanted to say something, anything, but Madeline was already walking away. And this time, she didn't look back. The next morning, Clara woke up to find the guest wing empty. Madeline's room was cleaned, her locker cleared, her apron folded neatly on the bed. No note, no goodbye, just absence. Sebastian was in the study. Clara didn't knock. "You let her leave?" He didn't look up. She made her choice. "No, you made it for her." He finally looked at her. "Clara, this is the real world. Loyalty doesn't build empires. Control does. And control means knowing when someone becomes a liability." Clara's eyes filled with fury. She wasn't a liability. She was a person. Sebastian's voice didn't rise. "And people like her always forget their place eventually. Let me ask you something, and be honest. Have you ever trusted someone, only to realize they'd never fight for you the way you fought for them?" Drop your answer in the comments, because sometimes silence isn't just painful, it's the loudest betrayal of all. The mansion was quieter than it had ever been, too quiet. The staff spoke only when spoken to. Sebastian locked himself in the study, throwing himself into meetings and legal documents. And Clara? She wandered the halls like a ghost. Everywhere she looked, she saw Madeline, not in person, but in presence. A half-folded towel on the upstairs banister, the humming echo in the stairwell. A coffee cup no one claimed, but Clara knew whose it had been. She tried to distract herself, volunteered, attended her father's charity gala, smiled for the cameras, but every polished photo felt like a betrayal, because the person she wanted to see it all was gone. One night she walked into the kitchen and just stood there. The lights were off, the counters were spotless, but the air felt heavy, like something sacred had been erased. She sat at the long prep table in the back, pulled her knees up to her chest, and whispered, "I should have gone with her." Across town, Madeline stood in a small apartment above a florist shop. It was nothing like the mansion. The walls were thin, the air smelled like roses and dust, and the silence was her own. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being cut loose. She had tried to move on, tried to start again. She took shifts at a diner near the highway. No chandeliers, no senators, just truckers and tourists and tips. People called her ma'am or honey, but never help. Still, something was missing. She thought of Clara every night, not because of the dinner, not because of the drama, but because of the way she had looked at her, really looked. And for a moment, Madeline had believed someone actually saw her. Not just the uniform, not just the labor, her. But that feeling had come with a cost, and when she walked away from that mansion, she told herself she'd done the right thing. She told herself that Clara couldn't understand, that she never would, until the letter came. Folded into an envelope with no return address, no last name, just one word. Please. Inside it, a single sheet of paper. Clara's handwriting. Shaky. Raw. No flourish. I didn't fight hard enough, and I'm sorry. I don't want to replace you. I don't want to forget you. I just want a chance to do it right, if you'll let me. Madeline read it once, then again and again. Her hands trembled, not from anger, but from something even harder to carry. Hope. She walked out into the alley behind the flower shop and looked up at the stars. She hadn't looked at the sky like that in weeks. Did she want to go back? No. But did she want to move forward without ever knowing what could have been? Not anymore. In that moment, both women, miles apart, made the same choice: to stop running. The kitchen was set for dinner again. Long table, crystal glasses, polished silver. But tonight, something was different. Not just in the menu, not in the guests, in the air. Sebastian Churchill sat at the head of the table, quiet. His usual smirk was gone. His suit was perfect. But his daughter hadn't spoken to him in 4 days. Until now. Clara walked into the dining room without heels, without a designer clutch, and without asking permission. She stood beside his chair, calm and steady. "There's someone I invited tonight." Her voice didn't waver. "You can choose to be part of this or not, but the table will be full with or without your approval." Before he could speak, she walked away, into the hallway, through the double doors, and there, standing just beyond the foyer, was Madeline, in a soft blue blouse, no apron, no tray, just her. Clara smiled. Madeline hesitated. "You sure about this?" Clara nodded. "I'm done letting silence make decisions for me." Inside, the guests shifted uncomfortably. A few recognized her. Some didn't. Sebastian stood but didn't approach. Not yet. Clara pulled out a chair. Madeline sat. Not to serve, to dine. The first dish came out, prepared by the new chef Clara had hired herself, a woman from Tulsa who'd trained in New Orleans and insisted on cooking with real butter and 0 apologies. The room was quieter than usual, but not tense, just watching. Sebastian cleared his throat. "Miss James." His voice was formal but softer. "Welcome back." Madeline looked at him, then at Clara. And for once she didn't speak with her mouth. She spoke with her presence. She was here, at the table, not beside it. That was enough. After dessert, Clara walked her to the garden. It was the same place they had stood the night Madeline almost left for good. The air smelled like jasmine. The moon was brighter than usual. "I don't know what comes next," Clara said, "but I want to find out, if you do." Madeline took a deep breath. "One step at a time. A beat, then, but next time you stand up for me, maybe let me stand next to you." Clara smiled. "Deal." Let me ask you one final thing. Do you believe true dignity can survive silence, cruelty, even betrayal? And do you think love, real love, can start with just one act of courage? If this story moved you, share it, because there's someone out there who needs to hear that they deserve to be seen.